On a Friday night on the 11 o'clock train, a 48-year-old man sat quietly beside his little girl, a child who had not spoken to a single stranger in 3 years, not since the night her mother never came home. But that evening, between the steady rhythm of iron wheels against dark rails, the little girl turned toward the woman sitting beside her and said softly and without warning, "You smell like my mom?" The man felt his heart stop cold, and the woman, a complete stranger, started to cry. What happened between three people who should have never mattered to each other, Marcus Hale had a system for surviving Friday nights. He bought 2 coffees at the station, one black for himself, one with too much cream and sugar for Lily, and they sat in the last car of the 11 o'clock train because the last car was always the emptiest. They did not talk much on the ride home. Lily would press her face against the window and watch the city blur into darkness, and Marcus would sit beside her with his coffee going cold in his hand, thinking about nothing in particular, because thinking about particular things had a way of undoing him. He was 48 years old, and he had gotten very good at thinking about nothing. He had been a structural engineer for 19 years. Bridges, parking structures, a stadium once work that left something solid in the world when you were finished. Then the company restructured, which was the polite word for what happened, and Marcus found himself sitting in a conference room at 46, listening to a vice president explain that his position had been eliminated. He went home that day and stood in the kitchen for a long time before he remembered that Carol was not there to talk to. Carol had been gone for 2 years by then. The kitchen was very quiet. He made grilled cheese for Lily that night, did not tell her anything had changed, and the next morning he started looking for work. He found the security guard position at Meridian Tower after 3 months of searching, which was not so long when you thought about it practically. The job paid enough, not what he had made before, not by half, but enough for the apartment, enough for Lily's school, enough for 2 coffees on a Friday night. He wore a uniform, now a dark navy blazer, with a brass badge that said his name, and he stood behind a front desk in a marble lobby and signed people in and out of the building. He had stopped mentioning his old profession to people, not because he was ashamed exactly, but because the explaining wore him out, and the sympathy people performed afterward wore him out more. Lily was 9 years old and looked almost entirely like her mother. Dark hair, wide brown eyes, a serious way of watching people that made strangers slightly uncomfortable and made Marcus ache in a way he had no good word for. She was a good student. She ate her vegetables without a fight. She never threw tantrums. In the 3 years since Carol died, she had also stopped talking to strangers, not dramatically. Not with a scene, she had simply gone quiet, like a radio dialed to low. Her teachers said she was fine. Her pediatrician said she was adjusting. Marcus said okay to both of them and carried his worry home each night and set it on the kitchen table alongside whatever they were having for dinner. The woman was already seated when they boarded the last car. She had taken the window seat, which Lily always preferred, but there were 2 empty seats beside her, and Marcus guided his daughter in without making anything of it. The woman was turned toward the glass with her arms folded, and Marcus noticed her shoulders, the slight held-in trembling of someone crying without permission. He recognized it. He had done that himself on more than one occasion in semi-public places. He looked away, which was the polite thing to do, and settled back with his coffee. Then Lily reached over and put her hand on the woman's wrist. Marcus went completely still. He watched his daughter do it slow and deliberate, the way Lily did most things, her small fingers resting on the woman's sleeve, and he could not have said anything, even if he had known what to say. In 3 years, he had not seen Lily reach for a stranger. In 3 years, he had not seen Lily reach for much of anything that was not him. The woman turned, startled mascara faint under her eyes, and Lily looked up at her and said quietly, "Are you okay?" The woman's name was Claire Bennett, though Marcus did not know that yet. She was 44 years old and had spent the day watching a child die. Not suddenly, 8-year-old Caleb Norris, had been her patient for 11 months, a boy with severe depressive disorder, whose parents had done everything right, and who had still slipped away from all of them the previous Sunday. Today had been the formal closure meeting with the family, which was a clinical term for sitting across from a mother and father and having nothing adequate to say. Claire had held it together through the meeting and through the 40-minute drive to the station and most of the train platform. She had not held it together on the train. She looked at Lily's hand on her wrist. She looked at the child's face, serious and unfrightened, simply asking. And Claire, who spent her professional life teaching other people how to process grief and sit with discomfort, felt something loosen in her chest that she had been clenching all day. "I'm okay," she said, and her voice cracked on the last syllable, and she tried again. "I'm a little better now. Thank you." Lily nodded like that was the answer she expected and didn't remove her hand. Marcus watched all of this and didn't breathe. They had been moving for 11 minutes when the train stopped. There was no announcement at first, just the lurch and squeal of brakes applied too hard, and then the long, pressurized silence of a car that was no longer moving. The lights dropped to the low amber of the emergency system, and the space was suddenly full of shadows and the smell of old upholstery and other people's coffee. Someone a few rows ahead muttered something. A child somewhere toward the front started to whimper. Lily, who had been afraid of the dark since the night Carol died in a hospital room that kept losing power, gripped the nearest solid thing, which happened to be Claire's arm. Marcus reached for his daughter's shoulder. He started to say it was fine. They would be moving again. There was nothing to be afraid of. The words were already forming, worn smooth from 3 years of use. And then he stopped, because Lily had already pressed her face against Claire's sleeve. And Claire had already placed her hand over Lily's, without hesitation or calculation, the way people do things when they are not thinking about doing them. Lily was not crying. She was simply holding on, and Claire was holding back, and neither of them seemed to need anything from him at that particular moment. He had 2 choices, and he understood both of them clearly. He could reach over and separate his daughter from this stranger, gently, politely, the way he had spent 3 years maintaining the safe, manageable perimeter of their life. Or he could let this moment exist, as it was knowing full well that his chest was doing something unreasonable, and that unreasonable things had a way of becoming complicated. He left his hand in his lap. He said nothing. The amber light held. Outside the windows, there was only the underground dark. The train was stopped for 40 minutes, and in that time, the 3 of them talked the way people only talk in contained, temporary spaces, on flights in waiting rooms, installed subway cars, where the usual social calculations don't quite apply. Lily did most of the early talking. She told Claire about her teacher, Mr. Adler, who wore the same brown sweater every Wednesday, and pretended not to, and about the book she was currently reading, the 3rd in a series, about a girl who could communicate with birds. She was matter-of-fact and thorough the way she was about most things. Claire listened with her full attention, in the way that some people are simply built to listen, and asked questions that showed she had been paying attention to the previous answers, and Lily approved of her. You could see it happening in real time. Then Lily said without transition, "My mom used to read to me at night. We were doing a whole series together. We never got to finish it. She said it simply not for effect, the way children sometimes speak a large truth before adults have properly braced themselves." Claire was quiet for a moment. She said she was sorry, and the words were plain and undecorated. None of the performance that people sometimes added to them. Lily said her name was Carol. She was funny. Marcus pressed his coffee cup between both palms and looked at the dark window, because it was that or something else entirely. He heard Claire ask how long it had been, and heard Lily say 3 years. And then Claire said quietly, "That's a long time to carry something." Not a platitude, not a solution, just acknowledgement. And Lily said with a certainty that was almost startling, Dad carries it more than me." Marcus turned his head. Both of them were looking at him. He had nothing to say to that, so he said nothing, and after a moment the conversation moved on, and he was grateful. When the lights came back on and the train began to move again, Claire shifted and mentioned she had an early start. She was a child psychologist. She said, but some of her work had expanded into corporate settings, organizational well-being consultations. She said it in the offhand way people mention their work when it's simply a fact and not a performance. Marcus, who had been almost comfortable, went very still. He asked her to repeat the word. She did psychologist. He said something neutral and looked back at his window and did not say another word for the rest of the ride. He had taken Lily to a psychologist 13 months after Carol died. The man's name was Dr. Fielding, and he had sat across from Marcus in a beige office and told him in the measured tones of someone reciting a treatment protocol that Lily showed signs of complicated grief response, that there were evidence-based interventions available, and that medication might be appropriate to consider if behavioral approaches were insufficient. He had used the phrase, "presenting symptoms," twice. He had not once looked at Lily like she was a person. Marcus had picked his daughter up from the waiting room, driven home, and never gone back, and he had carried a low-grade suspicion of the entire profession ever since, not heavy enough to stop him, but always there, like a stone in his shoe. For the rest of the ride, he answered when spoken to and gave nothing else. When their stop came, Lily told Claire it was nice to meet her. Claire said the same. Marcus said goodnight. On the walk home, Lily put her hand in his, and he did not say anything about what had just happened, and neither did she. The street was quiet and cold, and the walk was only 7 minutes, and he made it all the way to the front door before he exhaled properly. 3 weeks later, Marcus was 40 minutes into his Tuesday night shift at Meridian Tower when the elevator opened and Claire walked into the lobby. She had a leather portfolio under her arm and her hair pulled back, and she was reading something on her phone as she crossed the marble floor toward the front desk. She looked up when she reached him, and he watched the recognition move across her face. The slight pause, the recalibration, the particular social adjustment of seeing someone you know in a context that changes the geometry of everything. Her eyes moved to his badge, to the navy blazer, to the desk between them. He stood straight and kept his expression neutral with the practice of someone who had been keeping expressions neutral for a long time. "Marcus," she said. Not Dr. Hale. Not sir. Just his name in a normal voice, as if nothing about this was remarkable. "Dr. Bennett," he said. "Welcome to Meridian. If you could sign in here." He turned the visitor log toward her pen, already uncapped. "I'll need a photo ID for a temporary badge." She set her portfolio on the desk and opened her wallet. She did not say anything that would have forced him to respond to what was actually happening. He processed her ID and printed her badge, and she thanked him, and she walked to the elevator, and the lobby was quiet again. That should have been the end of it. She came in on Tuesdays and Thursdays for her contracted sessions on the 18th floor. She signed in, she signed out. She said hello when she passed the desk. He responded in kind. It was professional. It was perfectly fine. And yet something about it sat wrong in him he could not have explained exactly. What, without getting into territory, he had been carefully avoiding for 3 years. She never looked at him like she was adjusting her perception of him downward. That was the thing that bothered him. He had watched people do that particular readjustment his whole working life. You told someone you were a structural engineer, and they responded one way. You told them you were a building security guard, and something shifted subtle as a change in light, and they spoke to you differently, and asked different questions, and listened with different levels of attention. Claire did not do that. She said hello the same way every time. She asked about Lily once, not intrusively, just in passing, and he said Lily was fine, and she said good, and that was all. It should have been a relief. Instead, it was somehow worse, because it left him with nothing solid to push against. On a Thursday evening, 3 weeks into this routine, she came down from the 18th floor earlier than usual and stopped at the desk not to sign out, but to ask if he had a moment. He said yes, though he immediately wished he had said otherwise. She leaned on the desk with her forearms and looked at him directly and said, "I want to ask you something and I want you to tell me if it's out of line." He said, "Go ahead." She said, "On the train, when Lily mentioned her mom, you went somewhere else. And then, when I said I was a psychologist, you went even further away. I'm not trying to diagnose you. I just want to know if Lily is okay. That's all." Marcus looked at the lobby floor for a moment. The marble was very clean and very cold-looking. He said, "She's fine." Claire said, "Okay." She straightened up, picked up her bag, signed the visitor log with a neat signature, and walked out through the glass doors into the October night. He watched her go, and he was aware that he had just done something familiar, something well-practiced, and he was not entirely sure for once that it had been the right thing. Lily noticed before he acknowledged there was anything to notice. She had seen him shift their train schedule without explanation. She had seen him check his phone and put it away without responding. She was 9 years old, but she was Carol's daughter, which meant she tracked people with an accuracy that unsettled him on a regular basis. One night at dinner, meatloaf, because it was Wednesday, she looked up from her plate and said, "Why are you avoiding the train, lady?" He said he was not avoiding anyone. She said, "You changed our train time." He said the schedule had changed at work, which was technically true, in a minor and irrelevant sense. She looked at him the way Carol used to look at him when she was deciding whether to push or let something go, and went back to her meatloaf without another word. But she had gone quiet again. Not the way she'd been before the train, not that deep, defended quiet. This was different, more deliberate, like she was making a point he wasn't yet equipped to receive. Her teacher, Mrs. Calloway, called Marcus on a Thursday afternoon and said Lily had been sitting at the window during free period for the 3rd time that week, and she had said something that Mrs. Calloway thought he should know about. When Marcus asked what Mrs. Calloway said, "She told me she didn't want to be like you." He said he was sorry, he didn't quite understand. Mrs. Calloway said, "She said she didn't want to stop letting people in. She said she used to do that, and it was very lonely." He sat with the phone in his hand for a long time after the call ended. The apartment was quiet. Through the window above the kitchen sink, he could see the fire escape and the narrow wedge of sky between buildings, the same slice of sky he had been looking at for 2 years in this apartment, and it occurred to him that he had gotten very comfortable with a very small view. He thought about the last time Lily had come home from a birthday party one of her classmates, a girl named Sophie, and mentioned in passing that Sophie's mom had laughed at something she'd said. She'd mentioned it the way you mentioned something you haven't quite known where to put, like it was slightly foreign and slightly good, and she wasn't sure she trusted it yet. He had not understood it then. He understood it now, which was worse. He knew the shape of what he was doing. He had watched himself do it before after Carol, when he had methodically reduced the circumference of his life down to a size he could manage without unexpected damage. He was good at it. He was structured about it, like the engineer he used to be, eliminating variables, reinforcing load-bearing walls, making sure nothing collapsed under its own weight. What he had not accounted for was that Lily had been watching him do it the whole time, and learning quietly and thoroughly that this was how you survived. He found Claire on a Tuesday evening on the sidewalk outside Meridian Tower, waiting for a rideshare. He had not planned what he was going to say. He told himself he just wanted to be honest, to say what was true, to have a clear and adult conversation that closed this off cleanly. He walked outside in his uniform, and she turned and saw him and did not leave, which he noticed. He said, "I appreciate how you've been with Lily. I do. But I think it's better if we keep things the way they are." He said it without looking away, which he thought was the decent way to do it. I'm a security guard. You're a doctor. I'm not saying that to be hard on myself. I'm saying we're not in the same place in life, and I don't want Lily to get attached to something that isn't going to work out. Claire was quiet for a moment. A cab went past. She said, "Is that actually what you're afraid of?" He said yes. She said, "Because what you're describing sounds a lot less like a practical assessment, and a lot more like you deciding in advance that you don't deserve something good to happen." He did not answer that. She said, "I'm not saying this to fix you. I'm saying it because Lily is an extraordinary kid, and she didn't get that way by accident." He still did not answer. She looked at him for another moment, and then her phone buzzed. Her car pulled to the curb, and she said goodnight and got in, and he stood on the sidewalk in the cold, watching the taillights disappear around the corner. That night, he came home to find Lily already asleep. He went to check on her the way he always did. She was curled on her side, one hand tucked under her cheek, breathing slow and even, and on the nightstand beside her was a piece of notebook paper folded in half. He picked it up. In Lily's handwriting in purple marker, "Dad, I called Claire. I got her number from your phone. I told her you were being stubborn. Please don't be mad." He set the paper down very carefully. He looked at it for a moment on the nightstand beside Lily's water glass and her library book and the small clay handprint she'd made in kindergarten that had traveled with them through 2 moves and that he had never once considered throwing away. He sat on the floor of the hallway outside her door with his back against the wall, and in the dark and the quiet of the apartment, with the sound of his daughter breathing a few feet away, something in his chest that had been rigid for a very long time simply gave way. He thought about Carol, not the accident, not the hospital, not the things that had followed, but Carol laughing at the kitchen table with her glasses on grading papers from her evening class, telling him without looking up that he worried too much. He had always worried too much, and she had always known it, and she had always found it more endearing than exhausting, which was one of the many reasons he had loved her. He sat there until the feeling passed through him, and then he stayed a little longer because the feeling was not entirely unpleasant, because grief, when you stop fighting it, sometimes opens into something else, something warmer and less defined, something that doesn't have a clean name, but that feels like it belongs to the living. In the morning, Lily was at the kitchen table eating cereal when he came in, and she looked up at him with the preemptive guilt of someone who had been brave and was not entirely sure it had been the right call. He poured himself coffee and stood at the counter and let the silence hold for a moment. Then he said, "You went through my phone?" She said yes. He said, "And you called her?" She said yes, and set her spoon down carefully the way she did when she was ready to be held accountable. He said, "What did you tell her?" Lily looked at him steadily. "I told her you're not as scary as you act, and I told her you make really good meatloaf." He looked at her over his coffee. She looked back with her mother's eyes steady and unrepentant, and completely certain she had done the right thing. He checked his phone and found a text from Claire sent at 9:47 the previous evening after Lily's call. "She told me about the meatloaf. I believe her. If you want to talk, I'll be at the station tomorrow morning, 7:15 first platform." He read it twice. He put his phone in his pocket and went to get Lily's backpack ready. He dropped her at school, walked to the station, and arrived at the first platform at 7:11. Claire was already there holding 2 coffees. She handed him one. It was too much cream and sugar the way Lily liked hers, not the way he liked his, and he could not tell if she had made a mistake or done it on purpose. But either way, he drank it. They stood side by side and watched the first train come in, not getting on it, just watching, and for a while neither of them said anything necessary. The platform smelled like cold concrete and burnt coffee, and something mechanical, the ordinary smell of a city in the morning. He said, "I took Lily to a psychologist once. He made her feel like a problem to be solved." She said she was sorry. He said, "I know you're not him." She said, "I know I'm not." He said, "I've been doing the thing where I make the world smaller so nothing unexpected can happen. And it worked well enough until the night on the train." She said, "I know what that thing is. I've done my own version of it. It works up to a point." He said, "The point, apparently, is when your 9-year-old daughter starts doing it back at you." She looked at him, and for the first time in that conversation, he looked back properly, not managing it, not calculating, just looking. She said, "She called me at 9:30 on a school night and said, and I am quoting directly, 'My dad is being dumb, and I think you should know.'" He said, "That's accurate." The second train came and went without them. They sat down on a bench and talked for an hour, missing 2 trains, and somewhere in that hour, the conversation shifted from careful to honest, without either of them announcing it. Claire told him about Caleb Norris, not the details which were not hers to share, but the weight of it, the specific exhaustion of giving everything you have to someone and still losing them. She said she had been carrying it wrong, the way you sometimes carry things wrong, and don't notice until they start hurting somewhere unrelated. She said the night on the train had broken something open in her that she had not known was sealed. She said a 9-year-old had asked her if she was okay, and nobody had asked her that in longer than she wanted to count. He listened without filling in the silences, because some silences didn't need filling. He told her about the engineering job, not the losing of it, which was old news now mostly smoothed over, but the strangeness of learning who you were outside the thing you'd spent 20 years defining yourself by. He said, "I thought I was what I built, and then I wasn't building anything, and I had to figure out what was left." She said, "What did you find?" He considered this seriously the way he considered things that mattered. He said, "Lily mostly, and that I can make a reasonable meatloaf." She laughed a real laugh, unguarded, nothing polished about it. And he had not made someone laugh like that in longer than he could accurately measure. And it landed somewhere in the vicinity of his sternum in a way that was almost uncomfortable. He looked down at his coffee, and then back at her, and she was still smiling, and he thought, this is the part where the wall goes back up. And then he thought, not today. He said there was more if she wanted to hear it. She said she had time. So he told her about the first year after Carol, about making Lily's lunch every morning at 5:45, because the routine was the only thing that made the mornings survivable, about the engineering colleagues who had emailed twice, and then stopped about the way grief made you feel invisible, in plain sight, present in a room, but somehow not fully legible to the people in it. He had not said any of this out loud before, not to anyone, not even his brother, who had called regularly for 8 months, and then less regularly. After that, the way people do when life keeps moving, and you've stopped seeming like an emergency. Claire listened the whole way through. She did not offer solutions. She did not offer anything except her attention, which turned out to be the thing he had needed and not known how to ask for. He said, "I don't know what this is. I'm not good at this." She said, "I don't think anyone actually is." He said, "Lily is going to be insufferable about this." She said, "I know. I'm fully prepared." He said he should get to work. She said she had a session. They stood from the bench, and she did not move to leave immediately, and neither did he. And then she said, "Same train, Friday." He said, "We're always on the 11 o'clock." She said, "I know." He walked to work with his collar turned up against the October cold and the too-sweet coffee in his hand, and the city moved around him the way it always did, loud and indifferent, and entirely unaware of what had just happened on Platform 1 between a building security guard and a child psychologist, who had both spent several years making their worlds smaller, in different but recognizable ways. He passed the newsstand on Meridian, and the coffee cart on 5th, and the cluster of pigeons that were always for reasons he had never investigated, gathered at the corner of 5th, and Archer, regardless of the weather or the hour. He noticed them today, the way you notice ordinary things on the mornings when something has shifted, and the ordinary looks slightly different, as a result still itself, but lit differently, like a room after someone has adjusted the blinds. He felt without being entirely able to account for it, like a man with more room in him than he'd had the day before. He told Lily that evening briefly, and without ceremony. He said he was going to try. Lily looked up from her homework and said, "Try what?" He said, not making everything smaller. She considered this for a moment with the seriousness she applied to questions that deserved it. Then she said, "Okay. Can we have meatloaf again soon?" He said yes. She went back to her homework, and he went to start dinner, and the kitchen held the easy, ordinary noise of the two of them existing in the same space. The scratch of pencil on paper, the sound of a cabinet opening, the low hiss of butter in a pan. And it was not quiet in the way it used to be quiet, but in the way a room is not quiet when it contains exactly the right number of people. On Friday evening, Lily announced at 4 o'clock that she was going to sit in the window seat on the train. Marcus said he noticed what she was doing. She said she had no idea what he was talking about, and went to put her shoes on. They got to the station at 10:55, and Claire was waiting at the platform entrance with 3 cups, one black one with cream and sugar, and one that was mostly hot chocolate, with a token amount of coffee, because she had asked Lily what she wanted, and Lily had told her the truth without embarrassment. Lily took her cup with both hands and said, "You remembered." Claire said, "I pay attention." Lily gave a short, satisfied nod, the nod of someone whose hypothesis has just been confirmed. The 11 o'clock train was nearly full, but the last car had 3 seats together, and they took them. Lily at the window, Claire in the middle, Marcus on the aisle. The train pulled out of the station, and the city lights slid past the glass, and Lily pressed her face close, the way she always did, watching the dark come in between the stations. The train smelled of other people's days, coffee and wool, and something faintly metallic, and the car swayed in its familiar way, and the overhead lights hummed, and after a few minutes, Lily leaned back without comment and rested her head against Claire's arm, the way she did with people she had decided to trust entirely. Claire looked down at her, and then across at Marcus, and he was already looking back. He thought about the last car and the amber light, and his daughter's hand reaching for a stranger in the dark. He thought about all the systems he had built to keep the world at a manageable distance, the schedule, the route, the too small perimeter of Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and how none of it had mattered in the end, because Lily had simply reached over and undone all of it with one small gesture on a stalled train. He thought about a piece of notebook paper in purple marker that said, "Please don't be mad." He had not been mad. He was not capable of being mad at someone who had simply gone ahead and told the truth on his behalf, without being asked without hesitation, the way she had been doing since she was old enough to notice things. He thought about Carol's voice, "You worry too much," and found to his surprise that the thought did not carve into him the way it used to. It sat quietly. It was warm. It was hers, and it would always be hers. And there was room in him for that. And still room left over more than he'd known, more than he'd been willing to look at. The train went underground, and the windows went dark, and the car settled into its nighttime rhythm, the clatter of wheels against joints, the low conversation of strangers, the held warmth of a sealed space moving through the cold. Lily's cup sat empty in her lap. She had fallen asleep between stations, her breathing slow, and even her head still against Claire's arm, one hand loosely open the way children's hands go when they are fully asleep and entirely safe. Marcus reached over and took the empty cup before it could fall. He held it along with his own both hands full, which seemed on reflection about right. There was a version of himself not so long ago who would have reached over and taken the cup and repositioned Lily gently back toward his own shoulder, closed the gap, kept it contained. He did not do that. He let the geometry of the moment be what it was, the three of them, in the last car of the 11 o'clock train, Lily between them, the way she had maneuvered herself onto the bench that morning, as a child who had decided what she wanted and gone ahead and arranged for it. He thought with something that felt a great deal like gratitude that she had gotten that from Carol. Claire did not say anything. Neither did he. Outside, the underground gave way to the elevated track, and the city opened up below them, the lit windows, the moving headlights, the long geometries of streets going on in every direction. And Marcus looked at it, the way he used to look at a finished structure, with the particular quiet satisfaction of something that was holding something, doing exactly what it was meant to do. Something built not in spite of pressure, but because of it. The train ran on. None of them were in any hurry to reach the last stop.